The rain had stopped 3 hours before dawn, leaving the October air thick and cold across the saltwater marshes of coastal Georgia. Detective Lauren Briggs sat in her unmarked sedan outside the Glynn County Sheriff's Office, staring at the case file that had consumed 18 months of her life. Inside the manila folder were photographs of Natalie Owens, a 29-year-old marine biologist who had vanished without a trace from the Barrier Islands research station, where she'd been documenting migratory bird patterns. Every lead had gone cold, every theory had collapsed, and the family had stopped calling weeks ago. Lauren had accepted what she'd never wanted to admit. Natalie was probably dead, her body claimed by the vast network of tidal creeks and spartina grass that stretched for miles between land and sea. Before we continue with this story, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring you more stories like this one. The call came at 6:47 a.m. from a shrimper named Dale Hutchins, whose voice cracked with confusion as he reported what he'd seen. A woman had emerged from the Altamaha River marshlands near Wolf Island, walking steadily along the mudflats as the sun broke over the horizon. She wore the same clothes described in the missing person report, a faded green field jacket and cargo pants, and her dark hair hung in matted clumps around her shoulders. But what stopped Dale cold, what made him question whether exhaustion had finally broken his mind, was that her hiking boots showed no mud, no water stains, nothing to suggest she'd spent even 5 minutes in the wetlands, let alone a year and a half. Lauren reached the scene 40 minutes later, her heart hammering against her ribs as she navigated the dirt access road that wound through the marsh edge. 2 patrol units had already arrived, their lights casting blue shadows across the cordgrass. Natalie sat on the tailgate of Dale's truck, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, her eyes focused on something far beyond the visible horizon. Lauren approached slowly, the way you'd approach a wild animal that might bolt at any sudden movement. Up close, Natalie looked exactly as she had in the photographs. Not thinner, not weathered, her skin showing none of the damage that exposure to Georgia's brutal summer sun would have inflicted. Her boots were pristine, the leather barely scuffed, laces still tied in neat double knots. "Natalie," Lauren's voice came out softer than intended. "I'm Detective Briggs. Can you tell me where you've been?" Natalie's gaze shifted slowly to meet Lauren's, and for a moment there was nothing behind those brown eyes, no recognition, no fear, no relief. Then she blinked, and something human flickered back into focus. "I don't know," she said, her voice hoarse but steady. "I was at the research station. I was tracking a flock of ibises into the marsh, and then I was walking out this morning." The words hung in the humid air like something tangible. Lauren glanced at the 2 patrol officers who stood several yards back, their faces tight with the same disbelief she felt. 18 months compressed into a single sentence, with nothing in between. No explanation, no transition, just a gap where time should have been. They transported Natalie to Southeast Georgia Health System in Brunswick, where Dr. Raymond Park conducted a full medical examination. Lauren waited outside the examination room, reviewing her notes and trying to construct a narrative that made sense. Abduction, obviously. That was the only logical conclusion. Someone had taken Natalie, held her somewhere, and either she'd escaped or been released. But the physical evidence contradicted every element of that theory. No signs of restraint marks on her wrists or ankles, no malnutrition, no vitamin D deficiency despite allegedly being held captive through an entire summer. Her weight matched her driver's license exactly. Her muscle tone showed no atrophy, and the blood work revealed nothing abnormal except slightly elevated cortisol levels, consistent with acute stress. Dr. Park emerged from the examination room 2 hours later, his expression caught between professional composure and genuine bewilderment. "Physically, she's in perfect health," he told Lauren, pulling off his gloves. "Better than perfect, actually. Her dental work is intact, no new cavities. Her appendix scar from childhood is there, but here's what doesn't make sense. She has no insect bites, no sunburn, not even any significant dirt under her fingernails. If she'd been in those marshes for any length of time, she'd show evidence of it. Those wetlands are full of mosquitoes, no-see-ums, ticks. She should be covered in bites. Lauren felt something cold settle in her stomach. What about psychological evaluation? Dr. Keisha Williams from psychiatry is with her now, Park said. But Lauren, I've been practicing medicine for 23 years. This woman's body hasn't been through trauma. It's like she was put in stasis somehow, then released exactly as she was. The statement violated every principle of rational investigation, but Lauren couldn't argue with the evidence. She'd seen enough missing person cases resolved to know what recovered victims looked like, the haunted eyes, the skittish movements, the physical toll that captivity extracted. Natalie showed none of those markers. She seemed more confused than traumatized, more disoriented than afraid. Dr. Williams emerged an hour later, a slim woman in her 40s with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a tight bun. She gestured for Lauren to follow her to a quiet corner of the hallway, away from the nurses' station. "She's not lying," Williams said without preamble. "Or if she is, she's the most convincing fabricator I've ever interviewed." Her memories stop at the marsh edge on April 3rd of last year, when she was following those birds. The next thing she remembers is walking out this morning. No dreams, no sense of time passing, nothing. It's like someone edited out 18 months of her life. Lauren pulled out her notebook, forcing herself to focus on procedure rather than the impossibility of the situation. Could it be dissociative amnesia? Some kind of trauma response? "That's my working diagnosis because I don't have anything better," Williams admitted. But typically with dissociative amnesia, there are fragments, nightmare images, physical sensations, something. She has nothing, and her effect is wrong for someone who's been through prolonged trauma. She's calm, collected, just deeply confused about what happened to the time. "I need to take her statement," Lauren said. "Can she handle that?" Williams nodded slowly. "She's asking for it, actually. She wants to understand what happened to her. But Lauren, prepare yourself. I don't think you're going to get the answers you're looking for." They set up in a family consultation room, away from the institutional sterility of the examination areas. Lauren sat across from Natalie, a digital recorder between them, and tried to approach the interview as she would any other witness statement. Natalie had showered, and the hospital had provided her with clean scrubs. Her hair was still damp, falling in dark waves around her face, and in the fluorescent lighting, Lauren could see that she was indeed completely unmarked. No scars, no bruises faded to yellow, nothing to suggest violence or confinement. "Let's start with April 3rd of last year," Lauren said gently. "Walk me through that morning." Natalie's hands rested flat on the table, her fingers spread wide as if grounding herself. "I woke up at 5:30, like always, made coffee at the research station. The census count showed a large flock of white ibises had moved into the North Marsh section overnight, which was unusual for that time of year. I wanted to document it, maybe band a few individuals if I could get close enough." "Who else was at the station that morning?" "Nobody. Dr. Brennan had gone back to Athens to teach his Monday classes. I was alone for 3 days. Natalie's voice remained steady, clinical, as if she were reciting field notes. "I packed my observation kit, binoculars, camera, banding equipment, water, granola bars. I left the station around 7:15 and followed the service path that runs parallel to the tidal creek." Lauren made notes, comparing this account to the original investigation file. Everything matched. They'd found Natalie's observation kit at the marsh edge, contents intact, camera showing the last photos taken at 8:03 a.m., images of white ibises against the morning sky. "When did you realize something was wrong?" "I didn't, not really." For the first time, uncertainty crept into Natalie's expression. The birds were moving deeper into the marsh, and I followed them. The tide was going out, so the creek beds were exposed. I remember thinking I'd give it another 20 minutes, then head back before the sun got too hot. I was watching this one bird, a male with distinctive plumage, and I was trying to get a clear photo. And then she paused, her eyes losing focus. Lauren waited, letting the silence stretch. "And then I was walking out of the marsh this morning," Natalie finished. "I don't remember deciding to leave. I don't remember being anywhere else. It was like blinking. One moment it was April, early morning, cool air. The next it was October, and everything felt different." "What made you walk out toward the road?" Lauren asked. "Did you hear Dale's boat? Were you trying to reach help?" Natalie shook her head slowly. "I don't know what made me walk that direction. It felt like I was supposed to, like my body knew where to go, even though my mind didn't understand why." Lauren set down her pen, studying the woman across from her. Every instinct honed by 12 years in law enforcement told her that this should be an interrogation, that Natalie was either a victim in denial or someone with something to hide. But those same instincts also recognized authenticity when she encountered it, and Natalie's confusion was genuine. "Did anyone take you, hold you, hurt you?" "I don't know," Natalie said, and her voice finally cracked, revealing the fear beneath the calm surface. "I don't remember anyone. I don't remember anything. It's like I stopped existing for 18 months, and now I'm supposed to pick up my life where I left it. But I don't know how to do that when I can't explain where I've been." The investigation expanded rapidly once news spread that Natalie Owens had been found alive. FBI agents arrived from the Atlanta field office, specialists in kidnapping and missing persons, armed with protocols and databases. Lauren found herself sharing jurisdiction with federal investigators who approached the case with the same assumption she'd initially held, that Natalie had been abducted and was either protecting her captor or suffering from Stockholm Syndrome. But every investigative avenue led to the same dead end. No evidence of where she'd been or who might have taken her. Agent William Foster, a veteran investigator with 20 years of experience, sat in the Glynn County Sheriff's conference room 3 days after Natalie's reappearance, spreading crime scene photographs and timeline charts across the long table. "We've run every scenario," he told Lauren and Sheriff Dennis Page. "Random abduction, targeted kidnapping, voluntary disappearance. None of them fit the physical evidence." Sheriff Page, a broad-shouldered man in his late 50s, with a face weathered by 3 decades of coastal policing, leaned back in his chair. "What about the boots? That's the detail that keeps bothering me. You can't walk through those marshes without getting muddy. Hell, you can't stand on the edge without sinking 2 inches into the muck." "We sent her clothes and boots to the lab," Foster said. "There's some salt residue consistent with marsh exposure, but no mud, no organic matter embedded in the treads, and no water staining on the leather. It's like she materialized at the edge of the marsh rather than walking through it." Lauren had spent the last 3 days retracing Natalie's movements from 18 months ago, re-interviewing everyone who'd known her, searching for any detail that might crack the case open. Dr. Robert Brennan, Natalie's faculty advisor at the University of Georgia, had flown down from Athens to provide a formal statement. He'd been the last person to see her before the disappearance, leaving the research station the evening before she vanished. "She was one of my best graduate students," Brennan had told Lauren, his voice tight with emotion. "Focused, dedicated, absolutely passionate about her research. She wasn't the type to run off or get involved in anything questionable. When she didn't respond to my calls that Monday night, I knew something was wrong." They'd conducted ground searches, deployed dogs, dragged every accessible waterway within a 5-mile radius of where her observation kit was found. The working theory had been drowning, that she'd misjudged the tide, gotten caught in a tidal channel, and been swept out to sea. But bodies usually surfaced within a few days or weeks. After 18 months with no body recovered, the case had gone cold, filed away as a presumed drowning pending discovery of remains. "What about her family?" Foster asked. "Any friction there? Money problems? Relationship issues?" Lauren shook her head. "Parents divorced when she was 12, but it was amicable. She's close with both of them. Mother lives in Savannah, father in Atlanta. No siblings, no romantic relationship at the time of disappearance. Her bank accounts showed regular activity up until April 3rd, then nothing. No withdrawals, no credit card use, no electronic footprint whatsoever. So someone grabbed her, held her somewhere off the grid for a year and a half, then just let her go." Page's voice carried the skepticism they all felt. "Why? What's the purpose? And how did they keep her in such perfect condition?" The question hung unanswered in the air. Foster gathered his files, his expression grim. "I'm bringing in a cognitive interviewer from Quantico. Maybe Hypnosis can recover some of what she's blocked out. Because right now, we've got a victim with no crime scene, a perpetrator with no motive, and a timeline that makes no damn sense." Natalie's parents arrived that evening, and Lauren observed their reunion from a discreet distance outside the hotel, where Natalie was staying under protective observation. Virginia Owens, a tall woman with her daughter's dark hair gone silver at the temples, emerged from a rental car and stood frozen for a moment, staring at Natalie through the lobby windows. Then she was moving, crossing the parking lot in quick strides, and pulling her daughter into an embrace that spoke of 18 months of grief suddenly collapsing into overwhelming relief. David Owens followed more slowly, a lean man in his 60s with an engineer's careful movements. He wrapped his arms around both women, and Lauren saw his shoulders shake with sobs he'd probably been holding back since the day his daughter disappeared. These were the moments that made the job worthwhile, the reunions that defied probability, the cases that ended with life instead of death. But Lauren couldn't shake the unease that had settled into her bones. Something was profoundly wrong with this case, and every hour that passed without answers only deepened that conviction. She gave the family an hour before approaching, finding them in Natalie's room on the second floor. Virginia held her daughter's hand like she might vanish again if contact was broken. David sat in the desk chair, his eyes red, but his expression alert, that engineer's mind already trying to construct logic from impossibility. "Detective Briggs," Virginia said, her voice hoarse from crying. Thank you for not giving up on her." Lauren felt the weight of that gratitude, knowing she'd actually filed the case as presumed dead 2 months ago. "I'm glad she's home safe, Mrs. Owens. I know this is difficult, but I need to ask you some questions. Is there anywhere Natalie might have gone? Anyone from her past who might have wanted to hurt her or isolate her?" David leaned forward, his hands clasped between his knees. "We've been going through everything in our minds since you called. Natalie's always been cautious, aware of her surroundings. She took a self-defense class in college. She's not naive or reckless. Has she remembered anything since yesterday?" Lauren directed the question to Natalie, who sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing hospital scrubs. "Fragments," Natalie said quietly. "Not memories exactly. More like impressions. The feeling of being in a small space. The smell of salt water. Someone's voice, but I can't make out words or recognize who it belonged to. It's all so vague, like trying to remember a dream 3 days later." Virginia's grip on her daughter's hand tightened. Could she have been drugged? Kept sedated? "The toxicology screens came back clean," Lauren said. "No traces of sedatives, no drugs in her system except normal background levels of caffeine. But that doesn't mean she wasn't drugged previously. Most substances clear the body within 72 hours. What about where she was found? David asked. The marshes around Wolf Island. Is there anything out there? Any structures where someone could hide a person? Lauren had already reviewed the topographic maps and satellite imagery. There are some old hunting cabins on the barrier islands, but we searched those 18 months ago. The marshes themselves are too unstable for permanent structures. The tides flood everything twice a day. Nobody could survive out there without a boat and constant access to fresh water. Then where was she? Virginia's voice rose, cracking with renewed distress. She didn't just disappear into thin air for 18 months. Someone has to know something. Lauren wished she had an answer that would provide comfort, but the truth was she had nothing. She left the family together and returned to her car, sitting in the parking lot while she called her lieutenant. "We need Marine unit sweeps of every island in the complex," she said when he answered. "Someone could have kept her on a boat, constantly moving to avoid detection. Or there might be structures we missed, old fishing shacks, abandoned equipment shelters, something." "Lauren, we searched those islands 3 times, Lieutenant Paul Grove said. "We had dogs, we had aerial surveillance. If there was something to find, we'd have found it." "Then explain to me how a woman survives 18 months in salt marsh wetlands without showing any signs of exposure, malnutrition, or insect bites," Lauren shot back. "Because I'm looking at evidence that says she wasn't in a traditional captivity situation, and I don't know what the hell that means." Grove was quiet for a moment. "You think she's lying? That she knows where she was and isn't saying?" "No," Lauren said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "I think she's telling the truth, which means we're dealing with something we don't have a framework for understanding." The cognitive interview took place 2 days later in a neutral office space the FBI had secured in Brunswick. Dr. Patricia Chen, a specialist from the Behavioral Analysis Unit, conducted the session while Lauren and Agent Foster observed through a one-way mirror. Natalie sat in a reclining chair, her eyes closed, breathing deeply as Dr. Chen guided her through relaxation techniques designed to bypass conscious memory blocks. "Let's return to that morning." Dr. Chen's voice was soft, rhythmic, carefully calibrated to maintain the hypnotic state. "You're following the ibises into the marsh. The tide is going out. What do you see around you?" "Spartina grass," Natalie said, her voice distant and dreamy. "Gold and green, moving in the wind. The creek bed is exposed, mud and oyster shells. I can smell the pluff mud, that sulfur smell. My boots are sinking a little with each step." "Stay in that moment. What happens next?" Natalie's breathing quickened slightly. "The birds are moving deeper. I'm following them along the creek bank. There's something in the water. No, not in the water. Beyond it, on the other side of the creek. A structure? But that doesn't make sense. There shouldn't be anything out here." Lauren leaned closer to the glass, her pulse accelerating. This was new information. Natalie hadn't mentioned seeing any structure in her previous interviews. "Can you describe this structure?" Dr. Chen asked. "It's low, close to the water. Dark wood, maybe? Or metal? It's hard to focus on it. Every time I try to look directly at it, my eyes slide away, like it's not quite there." Natalie's hands gripped the armrests of the chair. "I'm walking toward it. I shouldn't be. The tide's going out. I need to head back, but I'm moving toward it anyway." "Who's making you move toward it?" "No one. I want to see what it is. I'm curious." Her brow furrowed. "No, that's not right either. I'm not curious. I'm compelled. Something is pulling me toward it, and I can't stop walking." Lauren felt the hair rise on the back of her neck. Beside her, Foster shifted uncomfortably. "What happens when you reach the structure?" Dr. Chen's voice remained calm, professional. Natalie's breathing became rapid, her eyes moving beneath closed lids. "I'm stepping into the water. It's cold, up to my knees, then my waist. I shouldn't be doing this. I'm going to get hypothermia. But I keep wading deeper. The structure is right in front of me now. It's a door. There's a door in the middle of the marsh, standing alone in the water, and I'm reaching for the handle. What's on the other side of the door? Darkness. No, not darkness. Nothing. There's nothing on the other side, but I'm stepping through anyway, and Natalie's eyes snapped open, her body jerking upright in the chair. I can't see past that point. Dr. Chen placed a steadying hand on Natalie's shoulder. It's okay, you're safe. You're in Brunswick in the office. Take deep breaths. Natalie's chest heaved as she struggled to regulate her breathing, her eyes wild with panic. That's not a real memory. That can't be real. There wasn't a door in the marsh. That's impossible. Lauren exchanged glances with Foster, who looked as unsettled as she felt. They'd hoped hypnosis would reveal a vehicle, a boat, a person, something concrete that could advance the investigation. Instead, they had a door standing alone in tidal waters, a description that sounded more like a nightmare than a factual account. After Dr. Chen completed the session and Natalie had recovered enough to leave with her parents, Foster turned to Lauren. That was either a metaphorical representation of her trauma, or we're dealing with something outside my jurisdiction. You mean like what? Alien abduction? Lauren's attempt at humor fell flat in the face of genuine confusion. I mean like I don't know, Foster admitted. 20 years with the Bureau. I've seen kidnapping cases, human trafficking, cult abductions. I've never seen anything like this. No evidence of where she was kept, no physical trauma, and now this, what? Hallucination? False memory? Or actual memory that we can't explain with conventional investigation, Lauren said quietly. What if we're asking the wrong questions? Foster looked at her sharply. What do you mean? I mean, what if the question isn't who took her, but what happened to her? Lauren gestured to the empty interview room. We're trying to fit this into a criminal framework. Perpetrator, victim, crime scene. But nothing fits that model. What if this is something else entirely? Then what do we investigate? Foster's frustration was evident. How do I write a report that says a woman walked through a door in the marsh and emerged 18 months later with no memory of the intervening time? The Bureau doesn't have protocols for that. Lauren didn't have an answer. She left the FBI office and drove back to the marsh where Dale had first spotted Natalie. It was late afternoon, the tide coming in, golden light slanting across the Spartina grass. She parked at the access point and walked along the service path, trying to retrace Natalie's steps from 18 months ago. The observation kit had been found about half a mile in, at a bend in the tidal creek. Lauren stood at that spot now, watching the water creep higher across the mudflats, and tried to imagine what Natalie might have seen. The marsh stretched endlessly in all directions, a maze of channels and grass islands that shifted with every tide cycle. It was beautiful in its own harsh way, but also isolating, disorienting, easy to get lost in. Lauren had grown up on the Georgia coast, had spent her childhood exploring these wetlands, and she knew how quickly conditions could change. But she also knew that surviving out here for 18 months would require resources, shelter, knowledge. And Natalie's pristine condition suggested she'd had access to all those things. She was about to turn back when movement caught her eye. Something dark in the water about 50 yards out, partially obscured by the tall grass. Lauren's hand instinctively went to her service weapon as she moved closer, carefully navigating the soft ground at the marsh edge. As she approached, the shape resolved itself into something that made her breath catch in her throat. It was a wooden post, about 6 feet tall, driven deep into the mud of the tidal creek. The wood was dark with age and water damage, covered in barnacles and dried spartina at the high tide line. But it was what sat atop the post that made Lauren's skin prickle with inexplicable dread. a weathered piece of driftwood carved into a crude approximation of a face, its features eroded by salt and time until they were barely recognizable as human. Tied around the post were strips of faded cloth, knotted at intervals, fluttering in the breeze like prayer flags. Lauren pulled out her phone and photographed the post from multiple angles, then carefully picked her way closer, testing each step to ensure the mud would support her weight. Up close, she could see that the carved face had been deliberately placed, not randomly weathered into existence. The cloth strips were synthetic material, not natural fiber, and some still retained traces of color: red, blue, yellow. Someone had put this here, and recently enough that the materials hadn't completely deteriorated. She called it in, and within 2 hours the marsh was swarming with technicians and investigators. Sheriff Page arrived, took one look at the post, and muttered something under his breath that Lauren didn't quite catch. Agent Foster brought in a marine unit to search the surrounding creeks, looking for more markers or evidence of human activity. "What the hell is that thing?" one of the crime scene techs asked, photographing the carved face from the waterline. "Folk magic, maybe," another tech suggested. "Hoodoo, root work. People used to put up markers like this in the old days, protection charms or boundary markers." Lauren listened to the speculation, but kept her focus on the physical evidence. The post was positioned almost exactly where Natalie would have been standing when she took her last photographs 18 months ago. That couldn't be coincidence. Someone had placed this marker deliberately, and whether it was connected to Natalie's disappearance or put up afterward, it represented the first tangible lead they'd found since the investigation reopened. They extracted the post as the sun set, hauling it out of the sucking mud and loading it onto a flatbed for transport to the state crime lab. Lauren stayed until full dark, watching the marsh disappear into shadow and feeling like she was standing at the edge of understanding something just beyond her reach. Whatever had happened to Natalie Owens, the answer was out here somewhere, hidden in the tidal cycles and shifting sandbars of the coastal wetlands. The forensic analysis of the post took 3 weeks, and the results raised more questions than they answered. The wood was identified as cypress, common in southern swamps, approximately 15 to 20 years old based on weathering patterns. The carved face showed tool marks consistent with a pocket knife or similar blade, and DNA analysis of fabric caught in the bark yielded partial profiles from at least 3 different individuals, none matching Natalie Owens and none in any criminal database. The cloth strips were identified as torn sections of synthetic outdoor clothing, the kind worn by hikers and campers, weathered beyond the point where brand identification was possible. So we've got a folk art installation in the middle of a salt marsh that may or may not be connected to our case, Lieutenant Grove summarized during a briefing at the sheriff's office. And we're no closer to understanding where Natalie Owens spent the last 18 months. Lauren stood at the conference room window, looking out over the parking lot toward the distant line where land met sky. "What if it's not about where she was physically?" she said slowly, working through the thought as she spoke. "What if it's about when?" The room went quiet. Grove frowned. "When?" "Time," Lauren said, turning to face the group assembled around the table: Foster, Grove, Sheriff Page, and Dr. Williams, the psychiatrist. Natalie describes her experience as instantaneous. One moment she's in April, the next she's in October. No memory, no sense of time passing. What if, from her perspective, no time did pass? "You're suggesting time travel?" Foster's voice carried more curiosity than skepticism. "That's science fiction, Detective." "I'm suggesting we consider explanations beyond criminal activity," Lauren replied, "because nothing about this case fits a criminal profile. Natalie wasn't harmed, wasn't held for ransom, wasn't sexually assaulted. She has no memory gaps that could be filled with recovered information. She has a complete void where 18 months should be. And she emerged in pristine condition. as if those months simply didn't happen to her body. Dr. Williams leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. There's a psychological condition called fugue state, where individuals lose awareness of their identity and can travel significant distances during episodes. But those typically last hours or days, not months. And patients usually have some fragmented memories of the fugue period. What about the door she described under hypnosis? Lauren pressed. A door standing alone in the marsh, leading to nothing. What if that's not metaphorical? What if she encountered something, some phenomenon, that we don't have language or framework for? Sheriff Page rubbed his weathered face. You're talking about something beyond law enforcement jurisdiction, Lauren. If this isn't a crime, what are we investigating? A disappearance and reappearance, Lauren said, which is still our job, even if we can't explain the mechanism. And we have one concrete lead now, that post in the marsh. Someone put it there, and those cloth strips came from real people. If we can identify any of them, maybe we can find others who've experienced what Natalie experienced. It was a thin thread to follow, but it was something. Foster agreed to run the DNA profiles through expanded databases, including military and commercial genetic testing sites. Sheriff Page authorized additional marsh searches, this time looking specifically for other markers or anomalous structures. And Lauren returned to Natalie, armed with new questions based on theories that sounded insane but fit the evidence better than anything else they had. She found Natalie at her mother's house in Savannah, a restored Victorian in the historic district. Natalie had gained weight in the weeks since her reappearance, her face filling out, losing that hollow quality that had made her look like something not quite solid. She wore jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, and she looked almost normal, a young woman recovering from trauma, returning to life. "I've been having dreams," Natalie said after they'd settled in the sunroom with coffee. "Not memories exactly, but impressions. I dream about being underwater, but I can breathe. I dream about standing in empty rooms with no doors or windows, and I dream about other people, strangers, who are looking for something they can't find." Lauren set down her cup carefully. "Describe these other people." "Different ages, different backgrounds. A man in his 50s wearing a business suit, a teenage girl in muddy running clothes, an older woman with a camping backpack. They're all searching, calling out names I can't quite hear, moving through spaces that don't make sense, hallways that curve back on themselves, rooms that are larger inside than their exterior dimensions should allow." The description made Lauren think of the DNA profiles from the cloth strips, 3 different individuals, unidentified. "Do you feel like these are people you met while you were missing?" "I don't know," Natalie admitted. "They feel familiar, but I can't remember actually encountering them. It's like I have second-hand knowledge of their experiences without direct memory of my own." Lauren pulled out her tablet and showed Natalie photographs of the carved post and the cloth strips. "We found this in the marsh, close to where you disappeared. Does it mean anything to you?" Natalie studied the images, her expression growing distant. "I've seen that face before. Not the post, but the face. In my dreams, it marks boundaries, places where the rules change, where you can step through and end up somewhere else." The hairs on Lauren's arms stood up. "What do you mean, where the rules change?" "I don't know how to explain it," Natalie said, frustration creeping into her voice. "It's like there are thin places, spots where the normal flow of time gets disrupted, and if you're in the wrong place at the wrong moment, you can slip through the cracks. You don't go anywhere spatially. You're still in the same location, but temporally you've shifted. You're out of sync with the rest of the world. How do you get back?" "I don't think you do normally," Natalie said slowly, as if working through a puzzle. "I think most people who slip through stay lost, moving through time at a different rate, days passing for them while months or years pass for everyone else. but somehow I found my way back to the right timeline. Or maybe the right timeline found me. Lauren sat back, her mind racing. It was the most coherent explanation they'd had, even though it violated everything she understood about physics and reality. If that's true, there could be others out there, still lost in these temporal gaps. Or already returned and never reported because they couldn't explain what happened, Natalie added. Who would believe them? I barely believe it myself, and I lived through it. Or didn't live through it, depending on how you look at it. They talked for another hour, with Lauren taking careful notes of every detail Natalie could recall from her dreams and impressions. When she left, the sun was setting over Savannah, casting long shadows through the live oaks and Spanish moss. Lauren drove back to Glynn County with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt since the case reopened. She couldn't arrest a temporal anomaly, couldn't prosecute a disruption in space-time. But she could document it, could look for patterns, could potentially help others who'd experienced similar disappearances understand what had happened to them. Over the following months, Lauren built a database of missing person cases with unusual characteristics. Individuals who'd vanished from coastal wetland areas with no evidence of foul play, no bodies recovered, no logical explanation for their disappearance. She found 17 cases across Georgia, South Carolina, and Florida spanning the last 30 years, all sharing common elements: disappearance near water, no physical evidence, searches that yielded nothing. Of those 17, 2 had eventually reappeared under circumstances similar to Natalie's. One woman who'd walked out of the Okefenokee swamp after 3 years missing, and one man who'd emerged from the Everglades after 7 months, both showing no signs of having survived in the wilderness. Lauren contacted both of them, conducting interviews that confirmed Natalie's descriptions. The woman from the Okefenokee, Jessica Lambert, described stepping through a gap between 2 cypress trees and experiencing a sensation of falling upward. The man from the Everglades, Daniel Torres, talked about following a light through the mangroves and losing all sense of direction and time. Neither had been believed when they tried to explain their experiences. Both had eventually stopped talking about it, accepting that they'd never truly understand what had happened. But it helps, Jessica told Lauren during a phone call. It helps to know I'm not crazy, that other people have experienced this. Whatever these places are, these thin spots in time, they're real. And maybe by documenting them, we can help others avoid them or understand them better. Lauren compiled her findings into an unofficial report that would never be submitted to any court or official investigative body. She called it Temporal Displacement Phenomena in Coastal Wetland Environments, and she shared it quietly with other law enforcement agencies along the southeastern coast. Some dismissed it as pseudoscience or creative storytelling, but others, veterans who'd worked missing person cases that never made sense, reached out with their own stories of individuals who'd vanished and reappeared in ways that defied conventional explanation. Natalie eventually returned to her graduate studies, completing her thesis on migratory bird patterns, with a new section that addressed temporal displacement as a potential factor in unexplained population fluctuations. It was speculative, unprovable, but it represented her attempt to integrate her experience into her scientific framework. She gave lectures at conferences, carefully framing her theories as hypothetical, and found a small but growing community of researchers willing to consider that time might not flow as uniformly as everyone assumed. 2 years after her reappearance, Natalie returned to the marsh where she'd disappeared. Lauren accompanied her, along with Virginia and David, making the walk out to the tidal creek where the carved post had stood. The post itself had been taken as evidence, but the hole where it had been remained, slowly filling with each tide cycle. "I'm not angry about losing that time," Natalie said, standing at the water's edge. "I'm sad about it, and confused, and sometimes I wake up feeling like I'm in the wrong reality, but I'm also grateful to be back, to have this chance to continue living. Wherever I was, whenever I survived it. And now I'm here, and that's what matters. Lauren watched the sun set over the marsh, painting the Spartina grass in shades of gold and amber. She thought about all the missing people who might still be lost in temporal gaps, experiencing moments while years passed in the world they'd left behind. She thought about the families, searching for answers she could never provide. And she thought about the mystery itself, vast and unknowable, existing at the intersection of science and impossible experience. "I'm going to keep documenting these cases," Lauren told Natalie, "even if I never solve them, even if I never understand what causes these thin places to exist, because people deserve to know they're not alone in this." Natalie nodded, her eyes on the horizon where the marsh met the sky. "That's all any of us can do, really. Bear witness to the unexplainable and hope that someday someone will find the words to make it make sense." They walked back to the car as darkness fell across the wetlands. Three women who'd been changed by an encounter with something beyond normal understanding. Behind them, the marsh continued its eternal cycle of tide and time, holding secrets in its mud and grass, keeping its mysteries close. And somewhere out there, in the spaces between moments, others might still be wandering, trying to find their way back to the timeline where they belonged, walking through wetlands with dry shoes, defying physics and possibility, existing in the gaps where reality bent just enough to let them slip through.